Coming up tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, the city of San Diego fixed its budget problems in part by not fixing roads and storm drains. That's according to a local expert.
We'll also tell you about an investigation into abuse and neglect at state-run homes for the disabled. KPBS Evening Edition starts now.
Hello, thanks for joining us. I'm Joanne Farian.
I'm Dwayne Brown. Water mains break in San Diego about 100 times a year. The result, a lot of water down the drain and some very expensive property damage. Reporter Kevin Crow with our partner Investigative News Source has been looking into this. He's here to tell us more. So, Kevin, what have those breaks cost the city in terms of money and water loss?
Well, in terms of money, it's cost the city a little bit more than $10 million, and that's in property damage as a result of lawsuits and claims brought against the city. In terms of water loss, it's about 360 million gallons since 2004.
Yeah, $10 million, that seems like a lot, but what does city officials have to say about the water loss and the number of breaks?
Well, in terms of number of breaks, they say it's not bad, but they're looking to improve their system. In terms of water loss, they say they beat the national average. The national average for water loss is about 14%. City of San Diego comes in at about 9.3, and they say that they're looking to replace all of their cast iron mains, which are the main culprits, by about 2017.
So there is some positive news. They're looking to replace the areas where the breaks have occurred, huh?
Yes.
All right. Kevin Crow with our partner Investigative News Source.
A North County tribe is heading to court to try to stop a development project. The San Luis Rey Band of Mission Indians wants to stop construction of a road where human remains were found. They want the road realigned. Developers say moving the road would be too expensive.
Another development dispute is going to the San Diego City Planning Commission. Developers of the proposed Fat City Loft complex are appealing its rejection by the Center City Development Corporation. The complex is opposed by solar turbines located across the street from the site. A hearing is expected within 60 days.
As expected, gas prices went up over the weekend, but they didn't go up quite as much as predicted, just 8 cents a gallon over last Friday's price. On Friday, analysts were predicting an increase of 10 to 20 cents a gallon because of trouble at a refinery in Carson. But those refinery problems are expected to continue through Wednesday.
The popularity of mobile food trucks is growing in San Diego County with about 1,100 on the streets. Now more than half of them could possibly face new food safety requirements. County supervisors will consider a proposal to add its food safety grading system for restaurants to mobile eateries.
We all want A's, just like in school.
When it comes to grading food safety, County Supervisor Ron Roberts says it shouldn't matter where you get your food from. You just need to know it's been stored and prepared properly.
This type of consumer awareness really creates a powerful incentives for the restaurants to make sure that they maintain the most sanitary conditions in the best conditions for public health.
San Diego was the first county in California to grade restaurants on issues related to health in the 1950s. Now Roberts wants to apply the ABCs to mobile food carts.
An inspection report is kind of a complex thing. This really correlates to the inspection report and gives the public the confidence that the system is serving them.
It's food safety. That's the key here.
Jack Miller's department oversees about 1,300 inspections a year of mobile food trucks in San Diego County. He says it's important the refrigeration system is working properly to avoid foodborne illnesses.
Keeping the food temperatures right. If there's hot foods held, they're at the right temperature.
Miller says this proposal is mainly designed for those who cook and prepare food on the trucks, not those who sell mostly prepackaged items. Mike Morton knows all about the grading system as operator of the Brigantine restaurants. He's also a member of the State Restaurant Association.
Ultimately, we're all serving meals to the public, and I think we should all be regulated by the same bodies to ensure food safety for all of our guests.
The Board of Supervisors is scheduled to consider Roberts' request to extend the grading system to mobile food trucks tomorrow. San Diego libraries and rec centers are going to stay open a little longer this year thanks to some positive budget news. But the question is, at what cost? Joanne takes a closer look at San Diego's mid-year budget report over at the Roundtable.
Last week, the City of San Diego Mayor, Jerry Sanders, dropped a bit of a budget bomb. City Council had solved the budget crisis after years of struggling with huge deficits. The news comes just a couple months after the city's independent budget analyst predicted continued deficits until 2017. So what changed in the last couple of months? Joining me is Vlad Kogan. He is a PhD candidate at UC San Diego's Department of Political Science and an expert on local politics. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So the city's general revenue budget, I think it's about $1.1 billion, now projecting a $16 million surplus. What changed?
I think the main thing that changed is the economy is getting better. So when the economy is doing well, there's more sales tax revenue, there's more tourism, so there's more hotel tax revenue. And so I think that revenue boost is what's responsible for creating this improved budget situation in the city.
I think specifically a couple of things, according to the mayor's office, sales tax, hotel tax, they increased, and also the city's pension payment dropped by about $25 million. So are these things good luck, or are they things that we can count on in the years to come in terms of addressing the budget deficit issue?
Well, it's certainly, I think, more than luck. You know, the economy sometimes does poorly, sometimes it does well, and right now it's doing well. That being said, we certainly can't necessarily count on it doing well going into the future. There's challenges in this country, there's challenges in Europe that could create a downturn, a double-dip recession, and that's going to impact both the city's revenues and its obligations like the pension, which rely so heavily on investment returns and the state of the market.
Now, we did invite the mayor to be on the show several times, and we're told that he's unavailable. We also invited the city's independent budget analyst, Andrea Tevlin, and received this statement: "It is premature for me to comment on the mayor's mid-year report and his perspective on the structural budget deficit, particularly in light of our deferred capital needs, low service levels, and an uncertain economy." Now, Vlad, I'd like you to respond to that in terms of deferred capital needs, low service levels, and uncertain economy.
Well, let me take all those separately. So one thing that we've done in the city of San Diego, for a long time, we've had a structural budget deficit, which means that the amount of revenue we've taken in has fallen short of the expenditures we've had to make. And we've closed that gap in a variety of ways. So for a long time, for decades, we would systematically underfund the pension plan. That's no longer the case. You know, that's a big controversy. And over the last decade or so, the way we've really balanced the budget has been to cut back on needed repairs, you know, repaving streets, maintaining libraries and fire stations. And what it does in the short term is, you know, not doing routine maintenance saves you some money. The problem is that it also creates a lot of costs down the road. So instead of simply, repaving the streets, you have to go back and do some major asphalt work. And so essentially what you're doing is you're saving money in the short term, but the expense of creating some very substantial costs down the road. And so in the city of San Diego right now, we have about $1 billion in deferred maintenance needs, repairs we should have made, but we haven't made yet. And going forward, in the budget that we have, the amount of money that we plan to spend over the next 5 years on infrastructure versus what it would take just to keep things where they are, just to keep the roads from deteriorating, we're actually spending about $100 million less than we need to. So certainly on paper, our revenues and our expenditures are now line up. The problem is that they line up primarily by underfunding really serious infrastructure repairs and needs that we have to make.
So that's deferred capital needs.
That's deferred capital.
I want to butt in before you talk
Sure.
about low service levels, because we want to show the people at home what this surplus, what the mayor plans to spend this money on. Libraries, increasing operating hours at all 35 branches by an additional 4 hours per week, recreation centers, adding hours there, and adding police cadets, and also funding a new fire station alert system. Now, so let's go back to low service levels
Sure.
that the budget analyst points out. Does this bring us up to standard?
Well, it certainly doesn't bring us back up to where we were even 10 years ago. So over the last 10 years, we've cut service levels in the city on a wide variety of services. So library hours are down about 25% over the last decade. Recreation center hours are down about 33%. Now, the mayor's proposal restores some of those services, but our library hours are still going to be much shorter than they were 10 years ago. The recreation center hours are still going to be much shorter than they were 10 years ago. And certainly going forward, I think it's unrealistic to expect that service levels will really recover to the levels we saw 10 years ago unless there is a substantial change in our tax structure and the amount of revenue we bring in.
Now, we haven't got a lot of time left. You talked about an uncertain economy, which was sort of the third factor. Also, the unknown out there is really redevelopment agency money. This was tax money that went to these redevelopment agencies that it's now going to go back into the big pool of money. And so we're not sure whether that's going to be a good thing for the city or a bad thing. We do know that in the mayor's budget report, his mid-year report, he pointed out that this does make assumptions that they will be getting a certain amount of money in this redevelopment new tax money. Do we know how this could all play out for the city?
You know, we don't. There's a lot of assumptions that have to be made, and I think they're unavoidable, and reasonable people can disagree about what those assumptions are. And I think the best way to deal with this uncertainty going forward is for us as a city to really figure out what our priorities are, so we know if revenues fall short, we know what we'd rather cut or what revenues we'd rather raise to deal with those problems. And I think so far that's a conversation that we haven't had yet.
Okay, Vlad Kogan, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
California has a special police force to protect some of its most vulnerable citizens, but an investigation finds a pattern of patients being neglected, abused, even dying at the state's developmental centers. Now, the officers are accused of shoddy work. The story from the Center for Investigative Reporting, next on KPBS Evening Edition.
Next time on Frontline, inside the worst nuclear disaster of the century. Told by the people who were there. For the first time, the whole story. Inside Japan's nuclear meltdown, a Frontline investigation.
Tuesday at 10 on KPBS.
I'm Jeffrey Brown. On the next news hour, 2 election stories. Gwen Ifill on the GOP contest in Arizona and Margaret Warner on the Russian presidential race. That's Monday on the PBS NewsHour. The American people have named PBS
the most trusted source of news
and public affairs
for the 8th year in a row.
Trust.
The American people have spoken.
Thank you.
KPBS Evening Edition is made possible by Joan and Irwin Jacobs and by
Hundreds of thousands of Americans suffer from developmental disabilities like cerebral palsy and mental retardation. In California, some of the most severely disabled are cared for at state-run facilities with round-the-clock supervision. Now, while the state spends about $300,000 a year on each patient, a month-long investigation finds a pattern of abuse and neglect at the centers and a failure to hold staff and administrators accountable. This story is reported by Ryan Gabrielson and produced by Monica Lamb at the Center for Investigative Reporting.
Stephanie Contreras remembers the joy that her baby brother Timothy Lazzini brought to the family. But early on, they realized that something was wrong.
He wasn't developing like a normal, healthy baby boy would. You know, there was no crawling, there was no walking, there was no talking.
As Lazzini grew older, his family found they could not cope with his disabilities. They turned to Sonoma Developmental Center in Northern California. It's one of 5 state-run institutions for people with severe developmental disabilities, serving roughly 2,000 patients who need full-time care.
We thought at the time it was the right thing for him.
But one day, Stephanie learned that her brother had suddenly died of internal bleeding caused by a torn esophagus. She says an autopsy revealed why.
It turns out that he had 3 lemon glycerin swabs that were found, 2 that were in his stomach and 1 that was apparently on the bed that he was sleeping in.
Lazzini was paraplegic and wheelchair-bound. His doctor said the young man could not have put the swabs in his mouth on his own.
Clearly, he couldn't have put them there, and they couldn't go through the feeding tube, which they have no business even being anywhere near him at all.
Dr. Van Pena was a physician at Sonoma Developmental Center for 10 years, where he says he was disturbed by what he saw.
Every shift I had, there were injuries.
He said the staff often could not explain how the injuries occurred.
Often the answers revolved around the person did it to himself or herself. Very, very often, I would say, these explanations had no ring of truth or reality to them.
Ordinarily, injuries and deaths are investigated by local police, but California's developmental centers have their own in-house police force. In Lazzini's case, that police force waited over 24 hours before examining Lazzini's room. By then, any potential evidence was gone. Medical records were missing, others had details crossed out.
Our brother died, and they can't give us a reason why.
The director of the Department of Developmental Services, Terry Delgadillo, said she could not comment on individual cases because of patient privacy laws, but said that all incidents were taken seriously.
We keep track of every allegation that is made. We then investigate it internally, and we track everything that happens, and we're always looking for opportunities to improve.
Yet during a recent 3-year period, there were more than 250 confirmed abuse cases and over 600 other unexplained injuries among the system's roughly 2,000 patients. Rarely has violence against the patients led to arrest or prosecution.
That means that we didn't really find out what really happened. That disturbs me.
California Assemblyman Jim Bell is chair of the Human Services Committee. He says injuries of unknown origin should be further investigated.
As a parent of somebody that's developmentally disabled and as a legislator, it is cause for alarm. I want to know if those investigations were completed properly.
Take the case of Van Ingram. When he was a child, he was diagnosed with mental retardation and severe autism. The Ingrams turned to Fairview Developmental Center in Orange County.
It became very clear he's not going to be able to ever talk or function on his own in society.
But one day in 2007, Larry Ingram, a retired police officer, got a call that his brother Van had been rushed to the hospital.
He was in ICU, intensive care, Hoag Memorial Hospital. I've seen a lot of bad sights in my life, but this is one of the worst.
A neurosurgeon at the hospital said Van's injury was no accident.
He said either your brother was body surfing at the Wedge in Huntington Beach and had a severe impact into the sand with a large wave, or somebody did this to your brother.
The staff at Fairview Developmental Center said Van had simply fallen out of bed. But Larry became suspicious of how the center was handling his brother's case.
I talked with the supervisor. The way he was handling it, the way he was acting, don't want to talk to you, can't talk to you, I became suspicious.
It turns out Fairview's in-house police force waited 5 days to begin interviewing potential suspects.
We had found out by then that there was no crime scene investigation at the time of the incident. We found out that no evidence was collected.
In fact, evidence was altered. In this sleep log, entries for the hour when Van's neck was likely broken were modified. Van's caregiver, Johannes Sotinko, admitted to changing the log, but the center's police didn't dig too deeply into why. An independent medical expert said that Van's death was likely a homicide, but his opinion was left out of the final police report. No one was ever arrested or prosecuted for Van's death. Director Delgadillo says her department is working to improve its police force.
We will be retraining every one of our staff to make sure that indeed they are providing the highest level of service.
But the problem may go beyond shoddy police work. Dr. Van Pena said he would document patient injuries by placing photographs in the medical records. But someone else, he says, would remove the photos.
I would go to see the patient perhaps at another time, and lo and behold, there'd be the area where the photograph was placed would be cut out, nice sharp edges, such as one would do with a scissors.
When he complained, Dr. Pena says he was asked outright by administrators to stop taking photos.
I believe that the administration wished to cover up the reality of these often graphic and severe injuries to patients under their care.
Dr. Pena was fired, he says, for refusing to cooperate. A federal court found evidence to support Pena's allegations, and a wrongful termination suit is pending. The state of California paid monetary settlements to the families of Van Ingram and Timothy Lazzini, but the cases remain unsolved.
There needs to be justice served, and I don't feel like there has been.
I look at his picture and it was wrong for him to die like that.
Our story was brought to you by the Center for Investigative Reporting. Ryan Gabrielson was the reporter and the producer was Monica Lamb. In response to this investigation, California lawmakers are planning public hearings and on-site investigations into the Office of Protective Services. This is KPBS Evening Edition.
On Nova.
Flying along the coast here is a horrifying experience.
Through eyewitness accounts and new evidence on the ground, an in-depth investigation of the causes and aftermath of Japan's killer quake.
Wednesday at 9 on KPBS.
Throughout its 50-year history, KPBS's news and public affairs programs have challenged conventional thinking. We're investigating issues before they reach a crisis. Our world is much more than just today's headlines, and KPBS helps all of us explore what's next so that we can take action now.
Hello, I'm Peter Marshall.
And I'm Nick Clooney with another edition of My Music from the glorious Big Band era.
Night and day. Music is timeless. It's my music. The Big Band vocalist right here on PBS.
Saturday at 6 on KPBS.
The newer cars being driven around Southern California freeways sport state-of-the-art technology like Bluetooth, GPS, and cellular connectivity. Cars are becoming increasingly computerized and connected to the internet. That has a UC San Diego researcher asking some interesting questions. KPBS business reporter Eric Anderson joins me to talk about the confluence of technology that creates a window of risk. Eric, tell us about how cars have changed over the decades.
Cars are not just the mechanical machines that many people grew up with, my age anyway. It's not just a hydraulic machine that works now. There are a lot of integrated systems that work together to improve safety. Airbags, for example, the windows that roll up and down on your car, things about tire pressure. All those systems are now run by computers. And the interesting thing is that, and this is what a UC San Diego systems researcher found, Stefan Savage, he said the interesting thing is now that cars are becoming not only increasingly computerized, but they're also becoming increasingly connected to the internet.
There's a misimpression that when you place your foot on the accelerator, that you are actually allowing the gas to go to the engine. In fact, you are telling a computer you would like to go faster. It is making the decision as to how much gas and oxygen and so forth to apply to the engine. And these are for very good reasons. It's for improved mileage performance, it's for better safety. But the consequence of everything being computerized, coupled with this secondary evolution, which is that cars are increasingly networked externally to the outside world, whether it's Bluetooth or cellular or so forth, means that the same kind of risks that we worry about with our PCs, we have to start to think about attacks coming into our cars.
And of course, the computer software that's written into these car systems hasn't been prepared like the computer software on your desktop. Your computer on your desktop deals with attacks all the time, with spam, with the possibility of worms or viruses. Cars not quite prepared in the same way. They haven't written the code for that yet, and that sort of poses the risk.
So, Eric, how did this issue come up in the first place?
Well, Stefan worked with a group of researchers at the University of Washington over the course of last year, and they decided, that the question came up, if these systems are increasingly computerized, is there a risk? They wanted to find out. So they kind of reverse engineered some of these systems to gain access to them, and they put out a paper last summer that outlined some of the potentials, some of the risks that are there.
We have built demonstrations where we take over a car 1,000 miles away and track where it goes and listen to everything that's said and then turn off its brakes. And so that it's feasible to do that with unmodified commercial vehicles. As to whether or not anyone is actually doing this, I'm unaware of it, and I can't think of a motivation for someone to do it right now.
But of course, there are creative people who listen to something like this and hear something like this and think about the possibilities. And I think that what concerns people here is if you can turn off a car's brakes or turn off the brakes of a lot of cars, perhaps during a rush hour, what might the impact be on a large metropolitan area if there is, for example, another sort of incident going on and first responders are trying to get to help. It might create a problem in that direction. Now, the car manufacturers are very concerned about this. Of course, they've taken this very seriously. And they've taken the step of preparing the software inside the cars to better deal with the potential threats.
So practically speaking, for all of the drivers out there with these cars, what are the real risks that they have to worry about?
Well, the real risk is not anything you have to worry about immediately. I think it's what you look at down the road. But people are looking at the problem, people are concerned about the problem, and of course they're working on the problem. If everything goes as well, you know, they'll perhaps separate some of the systems in the cars so that if you gain access to the Bluetooth, you might not have access to the system that operates the brakes of the car, and et cetera. There are things that can be done, and the automobile industry very much clued into that.
KPBS business reporter Eric Anderson.
Thanks, Joanne.
Tonight in our public square, as you heard earlier in the news, water main breaks are occurring about 100 times a year in the city of San Diego. A report by our media partner, Investigative News Source, says those breaks, plus thousands of leaks, have sent about 360 million gallons of water into streets, homes, and businesses since 2004. The story first appeared on KPBS.org this morning, and we're already getting feedback. Sheila Mayfit-Watts writes on Facebook, Morena Boulevard, just north of Claremont Drive, has had a steady leak for at least the last 4 years, maybe longer. It is not a small trickle either. I fully expect to see a huge sinkhole resulting from this. It is inevitable. Well, if you have water leaking near you, let us know. Or if you've experienced a water main break in your area, tell us when and where. You can send me an email, kpbs.org, or follow us on Twitter. And of course, you can always like us on Facebook. Now let's go back to the news desk where Dwayne has a recap of tonight's top stories.
A new report says San Diego's aging water system has lost 360 million gallons of water in the past 8 years. Investigative News Source found water lines are breaking at a rate of more than 100 a year, and it's costing the city at least $10 million. A North County tribe is going to court to get a planned road rerouted. They want to move it away from a site where Indian remains were discovered. Developers say moving the road would be too expensive. And food trucks could be required to display health inspection grades, just like restaurants do. San Diego County Supervisor Ron Roberts says he wants new rules for food trucks to show their letter grades from the health department. You can watch and comment on any of the stories you saw tonight on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks so much for joining us. You have a great night. We leave you with a look at the forecast.